Hi, everyone. As Tara introduced me, I'm Debbie Aller. I'm based at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and I love following Kristen's presentation. A lot of what she said, I will reiterate and reemphasize, which is great because I think a lot of points are absolutely really essential. So before I get started, and because this session we're thinking about agriculture and farmers, I want to see how many farmers are in the room. Nice, that's a good amount. How many people are working with farmers or trying to sell their biochar or working with farmers currently? Cool. How many are trying to get into the markets of getting biochar to farmers? A few. Awesome. Okay. Or having potentially issues linking up with farmers, right? I hear that a lot. So I'm going to kind of dovetail off of what Kristen presented and really talk about designing and implementing actual successful on-farm demonstration trials. And so I take it largely from a research side of things, but this is if you're, say, a business trying to work with a farmer and really want to show the success of your product or compare it to the standard practice of a farmer. So kind of going to walk you through some of how I approach this, both from a research and extension side of things, as well as just some common questions and conversations and who to engage with when you're thinking about designing a trial. And I wanted to present on this year because I get questions all the time or people coming to me of saying, we just compared side by side. And they really didn't get robust data. And a lot of data we get coming from the agricultural community with biochar just happens to be anecdotal information. It's really not robust information that we can then be, farmers can actually say, I have real data to show other farmers the benefits of biochar for a given region. And so we're going to dive into some of these designs there. And so, wait. Oh, sorry, I was just showing that. Cool. I'm seeing something different on my screen. Let me just, apologies, get myself oriented here. Okay, so as Kristen alluded to, and I think everyone is aware, that biochar is incredibly diverse. And so when we're talking about this from an agricultural standpoint, right, we know these soil, by crop, by biochar, by environment, by management, dependent situations. And we have all these interacting factors that at the end lead to different results, potentially in different environments. And you can see the picture on the left, just some of the diversity of the biochars, which Kristen already mentioned before. And so we know, right, that biochars come in many different forms, many different uses, and that biochars are not created equally. And so when we're talking about it from an agricultural side of things, we can talk about raw biochars, and we can talk all the way through pelletized, blended, granular biochars, all the way to these micronized liquid biochars that can be applied in different ways. And so we're talking about a tremendous diversity of products that at the end of the day, people refer to as biochar, right? But they're not all the same. And so when we're talking with a farmer and we're talking about implementing a trial, it's where do I begin, right? We're at essentially a crossroads where it's like, what biochar do I use? What rate do I use? When do I apply it? Where do I apply it? And so piggybacking on what Kristen said, she often calls it the 3 R's. I like to refer to it as the 4 R's, same thing. And part of that is the same source, rate, place, but I really emphasize time. And sorry if any of the graphics got skewed up a little bit in transferring files, but I emphasize the right time because I also do a lot of work in perennial cropping systems, and time is, when you actually apply biochar when you're working with perennial crops, is essential. There's a big difference whether you get that biochar deep trenched into the rooting or potential rooting zone of perennial crops versus just top dressing trees or shrubs or anything in that area, vines. So time is really critical if anyone is working with perennial cropping systems. So I don't want to hone in on that too much just because Kristen had mentioned that, and I'll have a few other slides about that. But I really want to get into this who, what, where, when, and why when we're talking about actually implementing biochar trials. And so some of the questions in working with farmers and others as well is, who am I doing this trial for? Is this only for my farm, or am I trying to gather information to try and get others to adopt biochar technology within the agricultural setting? What resources do I have? Labor is the #1 cost input for farmers, and labor is tremendously short in this country. And so how much labor do you have to establish a trial? What is the scale of that trial? generally finances of a farm, whether a small scale, high value cropping system, or a large scale commodity crop farm. Big differences there in terms of financing and equipment availability and other resources you have on your farm that you have available for implementing a trial. And at the end of the day, or the first question is, what is this resource concern, as the NRCS calls it? Why are we actually applying biochar? What is the point in doing this, right? When we think of, as a farmer, we apply fertilizer because our crops need fertilizer to grow. We apply lime, right, because we have pH issues with our soil. We need to neutralize that to actually be in the adequate pH range for the crops to take up those nutrients. So why are we applying biochar? There's a cost associated with that input. We need to know why at the end of the day. Where do I conduct this trial on my farm? And I'm going to emphasize this a little bit more based on Mayo's question as well about linking soil quality with potential biochar impacts. So where on my farm do I do it? And when should I start this trial? Should it be done in the fall? Should it be done in the spring? How long do I want it to last? How long do I actually want to collect data? And what am I interested in analyzing with biochar as well? Do I just want crop yield data? Do I want soil health parameters? Do I want other information as well? How much data do I want to collect here? And so we want to be meeting with the farmers and all the parties who are involved potentially in this trial. This could be extension partners, NRCS, soil and water, the farm's nutrient management planner, crop consultants. It's really important, I think, if you're developing trials and successful trials, to engage with all parties potentially involved with that farm. So everyone is connected and knows what's going on. And so here's just laid out some useful farm level information that I think could be collected and should be collected from a farm to get started as a foundation for setting up a successful trial. And some of them are very basic, location, what type of farm is this, where the field is located, but thinking farmer goals, writing those down. What is the issue behind why am I applying biochar? Do I have drainage issues related to slope? Where's this field? And getting some information about management practices of the farmer, nutrient management, crop rotation, issues with weeds. Does a farmer own or rent that field? That can have significant impact on being able to conduct field trials, and just basic information there. And so, like I said, for me, I'm establishing a research question, developing hypotheses, but when we're talking about on-farm demonstration trials, these aren't necessarily research trials, but at the end of the day, there's a question being asked. There's a reason we're conducting these trials. And so some examples, kind of those motivation for these trials, right, are, can this biochar reduce my fertilizer inputs, right? Can it offset other costs I have as a farmer? Can it increase soil organic carbon? Will it help improve crop yields? Will it help neutralize my pH and improve productivity? Are there opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? These are just examples of potential questions that might be driving a project on farm or showcasing a biochar on a farm. And so there are many other questions that can be asked, right? Those are just examples. And like I said, it's really working directly with your farmer to determine their goals and why they want to be utilizing biochar. I'm constantly hearing from companies and individuals saying, there's so much potential, right? And Kristen showed the numbers there. There's so much potential to get biochar out on the landscape, out in the agricultural environment, but farmers, they're not applying it, or I can't break into those markets. And there's really a disconnect right now, I'd say, in the industry between biochar producers and farmers. Don't know how to communicate with each other, and I think there's a lot of just discrepancy potentially in goals. And so the idea with my talk is to try and help you in terms of the conversations you might be having or want to have with farmers to get into that environment. And so talking about the right source, always local, available, sustainable. I think as producers, right, a lot of folks are working with whatever organic feedstocks are available in your region of the country. And we know this is diverse across the US. I'm in New York, there's a lot of woody waste material. Down in the South, there might be rice hull waste. There's a lot of manure all over the country that can be pyrolyzed, so it totally varies. If you're interested in working with organic farms and you don't know this, it's important that right now organic farms cannot apply manure-based biochars. Does everyone know that? Yep. Okay. Some people are not aware of that, and there's a lot of questions as to why. That's just right now the National Organic Standard. It's not acceptable as a practice. Just taking a deeper dive into what Mayo's question was before about matching up the Web Soil Survey soil quality parameters and talking about this right place, where to apply biochar. And so in thinking about setting up on-farm demonstration trials and where to apply it, right, we know what soil parameters benefit most from biochar applications. And so this was the work that Kristen alluded to here from my colleague Hamze Dukihaki that was published back in 2019. That was really the foundation for the biochar tool in Web Soil Survey. And this is, as many of you can see here, the Central Valley of California, and it directly overlays soil properties on, really you can see clearly on the east and west sides of the Central Valley, with a potential positive response in crop yield through a biochar application. And so the figure all the way on the left with the blue and red is pH, and then the next one over soil organic matter, then cation exchange capacity, and the one all the way on the right with the green and red there. Apologies for anyone who's colorblind here. But we can essentially overlay soil properties with the potential for a positive response in yield with a biochar application. And so you can see there's a clear distinction between the Central Valley. Within the eastern part of the Central Valley, we have more acidic soils that are lower in organic matter, have a lower cation exchange capacity, so we tend to say these are poorer quality soils. And on the western side of the Central Valley, a more neutral pH, higher soil organic matter, higher cation exchange capacity, and then you can, so these would be our higher quality soils, and then you can see the figure all the way on the right, which is the potential for a positive yield response from biochar, is that on that eastern side of the valley, the likelihood of having a positive yield response is greater than on the western side, and that is directly connected to the soil indicators, soil quality in that environment. And so this is important when we think about where on a farm we might want to be applying biochar and demonstrating the benefits. That we can't necessarily think, or let's say with a farmer, the cost of biochar, I can't apply biochar to 1,000 acres, right? But maybe I can start on 20 acres. And where on my farm do I have poor quality soils where I have a resource concern and I might want to be improving the acidity, helping neutralize the pH, or building organic matter, or I'm looking to improve water and nutrient retention. And so just starting to think about where on a farm to locate some trials. So this just states what I had said before. So we really want to be, for demonstrations, at least initially, I think it's important to target these lower quality soils. And many farmers know where they have poorer performing soils on their fields. And so talking with them directly can help guide the location of these trials. Because farmers really, even with the help of 336, for example, farmers cannot currently afford biochar at large scales, at least the farmers I know, and I work with hundreds of farmers. It's not as cost effective. It's really cheap to buy synthetic fertilizer still, or even compost and other materials. So we need to be smart about where we can really show the benefits of biochar, just be more strategic with the applications of them. Rate as well. A lot of people in the beginning thought more was better. That's not necessarily true, right? And so once again, we need to be thinking about targeting field application rates. And this can be directly tied into a nutrient management plan, knowing how much, what is the nutrient value of my biochar? Can I offset the fertilizer input with the biochar? If, for example, I'm using a manure-based biochar, considering other field needs and costs as well. And so this is really nice and can utilize tools, as Kristen mentioned in her talk. Time in terms of applications, single and repeated applications work. This, once again, ties really into what cropping system are you looking to set up trials in. Single applications can be very effective, I think, as everyone knows, and these are really the ideal applications for perennial cropping systems. I get a lot of calls or questions after biochar was applied and top dressed in perennial systems. And I am always like really thinking about getting it deep trench targeted before you're establishing a perennial crop. Just the efficacy, the bang for your buck you get from biochar and getting it deeper into the soil is really important for those systems where you can't disturb them after they've been planted. And repeated applications, even in commodity cropping systems or our annual cropping systems, can be more economical. You can tie them in nicely with regular lime applications or annual manure or compost applications that a farmer makes, or even urea applications for whatever it is. And this really aligns nicely with management practices of farmers. Perfect. Okay. And so getting into the planning and implementing of the trial, I'm way behind, sorry, I'm just rambling, I guess. But really, we always need a control, right? And on any farm, this is going to be whatever the baseline, the standard practice is for growers. So it's always comparing to what is the standard practice of growers. I think that's really important because that's what they know. The simplest trial, right, is control versus biochar, and these are our side-by-side trials. But there's often more treatments we're interested in as both a farmer and a biochar producer, thinking about the rate or the timing, how can it be mixed with other amendments. Always needing replication. Really, this is critical and often left out of trials that I find biochar producers do with farmers. It's often just the side-by-side single demonstration, but if you can get replications into your trials, that's really important. It's more robust and you can draw much stronger conclusions from a statistical standpoint. Randomizing these trials is incredibly important, and I say that because there's so much heterogeneity in our soils. Like I showed simply for the Central Valley of California, soils are diverse, probably from here to the back of the corner. If I was in a field, they could be completely different, and we need to factor that in to showing the benefits of biochar in the field. So when we're selecting a field, like I said, considering that resource concern, trying to target areas where we have an issue with production, avoiding the edge of fields in our headlands because these are often compacted or there's some other variable that can be already affecting the yield. Considering the slope of the field and nearby waterways. So this is just a yield map of a field on the bottom there, where you can see in red, poorer yield, in green, better yield. And so we set up a trial in this field, actually in the middle of that field, avoiding headlands, and it encapsulates the diversity of that field. And so I just want to run through a few trial design options to consider that are robust in terms of replication, randomization, if you're thinking about working with growers. A randomized complete block design, this RCBD, is a really robust trial. This is ones we are doing with American Farmland Trust for some of these national biochar trials, and many of the trials I do with growers that I work with, but utilizing blocks where you're capturing this heterogeneity of the fields and you have each replicate in each block. Many of you might have heard these types of trials long ago, but the treatments are randomly assigned in each block, and you're helping address the heterogeneity of that field. So that's a pretty basic one. Another one is a single strip spatial evaluation approach, and this is one for our larger scale commodity crop farms that works well if you have at least 3 years of yield data. And so the yield data within the strip and on both sides directly surrounding it are used to evaluate if the treatment impacted yield, and it's using a spatial regression model to actually target, to compare a different treatment with its impact on yield. So this works if you have at least 3 years of yield stability data from yield monitors. So this works well for our larger scale farms. And you can, once again, evaluate controls versus one or more treatments. The last one I just want to mention is the spatially balanced complete block design. So this is useful for if you have many different treatments, and it's based on a standard spatially optimized experimental layout, randomly assigned, and so these can be blocked out in different parts of the field. Once again, all 3 of these field designs are used to capture the heterogeneity of a field. And so if you have higher or lower performing sites of fields. And in many cases, it works if you have yield monitor data to capture that yield. So those 3 designs are 3 really robust options for on-farm trials with biochar that help get real valid data and not just anecdotal data for farmers. They can be a little bit tricky to set up, but really in that first year after setup, really can provide a lot of good information. And I know I only have a minute left, and maybe I won't leave time for questions, but happy to follow up with anyone afterwards. But evaluating outcomes, right? The basic ones, this is really important, at least soil and crop data. But once again, it depends upon your research question, what data you do evaluate. And you want to consider short and long-term benefits and what you're interested. Do you want immediate return, or what are the future parameters that could be measured as well? In the last couple slides I have, a lot of people are interested in precision applications. Farmers want to know how much they're applying. This can be a little tricky to do, considering moisture content, particle size, equipment used to apply biochar. You really need to be weighing exactly how much you're applying out on the field and spreading it across an area. So the pictures on the left was a trial I did with an organic farm in upstate New York, a large-scale farm there, who they actually weighed the amount of biochar that they were applying, and we were really precise in that field. Last thing I want to say for working with farmers and setting up trials, and I think this is something that a lot of farmers have been intimidated by, is how do I actually get that biochar on my field? And the best thing is utilizing the farm equipment you already have, not needing specialized equipment to apply biochar. This is just a couple various equipment, different scales on farm. This farmer, this large-scale organic farmer that I worked with, he said he liked how the biochar spread better than ag lime. So he was using his lime spreader, and he was happier. He said it flowed through easier than the lime he spreads. And so he's spreading it across a large field of red clover before incorporating in the spring. This was actually last year when we applied it. Just some other application considerations for trials and working with farmers. Moistening the biochar, I think everyone knows it's light and dusty, and not applying it when there's a lot of wind. And getting it incorporated to the soil if you can, wearing PPE if needed, and blending it as well is a really great way. I just have this slide up here because cost and availability is always comes up when talking about on-farm trials. We know biochar is more expensive than other soil amendments out there, and there's currently, at least in my neck of the woods, I would say across the Northeast, there's just a real disconnect I see between producers and farmers. Producers want to reach farmers. Farmers are interested in biochar, but they don't know how to communicate and get the information that they're looking for. And that cost, hopefully it continues to come down. 336 was already spoken about. Standards, right? There's another session going on about standards right now, and I think that's going to be really important for advancing the industry, also in agriculture, and moving towards more biochar-based fertilizers and blended products, I think are going to be really important for biochar as well. And so with that, I think I probably don't have time for questions now, but there's my email, and I'm only here through tomorrow, but feel free to follow up if you want to touch base at any point. So thanks very much for your attention.